Hey everybody, and welcome back to Dude's Brunch, a podcast about pop culture, internet garbage, and black coffee. I'm your host, Taylor Olmstead, and with me it's my good buddy, Tyler Reed. Tyler, what did you have for brunch today?
Hey everybody. Today for brunch, I was at work. You all know it. Y'all love it. But today, I decided to have... God, what the fuck is going on? I hate this. I hate new Skype. New Skype sucks. Let's just detour there for a second. I hate this thing. These buttons don't make any sense. Anyway, I was working. TLDR. Today I had a biscotti. Isn't that fun? Because I'm learning to love hot coffee, and so I was dunking it in my coffee, and I'm like, this still tastes like Garbo. I still hate hot coffee, but I'm learning to love it. I'm learning. It's a long road.
You've been working in coffee for like 10 years and you can still only drink it iced, and I find that to be an atrocity. Sean Evans is here. Sean, please tell me you ate something today.
So this week I went to a place called Mr. Waffle in downtown DC. It's kind of a franchise around here. And I had the Carolina barbecue waffle, which is coleslaw, pulled pork with barbecue sauce, lettuce, and tomato on a waffle. And then next door to this place was a place called La Columbia Coffee, and they make nitro brewed cappuccinos. It was delicious.
Everything about this sounds amazing, and I want to trade breakfasts with you.
It was really good. I got 2 coffees from this place and spent $10, which was way more than I wanted to spend on coffee. But it was absolutely delicious coffee and fun to have.
Nice. Our guest this week, it's musician, percussionist extraordinaire, Seth Alexander. Seth, what did you have for brunch this week?
This week or today?
Today. I mean...
The most relevant one.
Yeah.
Probably the most relevant would be today, because this week I was in Indianapolis at a percussion convention, which is basically like a big music conference for a bunch of nerds. So I didn't get to eat a good brunch ever until this morning. And I had, I made myself an omelet, just kind of between 2 toasted pieces of bread, little hummus spread on it, because I was out the door to go to I've been accompanying some dancers, so I had to go to a dress rehearsal and play some weird music again. And I've been drinking a lot of coffee lately, so because as the semester goes on while I'm in grad school, the coffee gets blacker every week, so I am rotating between tea and coffee so I don't just drown in black coffee every morning in a bath. So
There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, you got to remember what podcast you're on here.
I know.
That's the only way I have coffee.
Is black?
And cold.
Oh, yeah. Well, think about it this way. At the beginning of the semester, I don't want to just douse myself in caffeine every day. I want to take it easy because I'm just full of energy and ready to go. And then, week 10 rolls around and I just can't even get out of bed, so...
That's right. I forgot what it was like to have the natural zest for life. I'm sorry.
Yeah, which is only the first 2 weeks, and then you completely, as the professor I TA for, Andre Grabu, who, as he puts it, everyone just loses the will to live slowly but surely come week 5.
Yeah, it sounds about right. Sean, can you validate that experience?
When I look back on graduate school, I thought at the time I did, but actually it was once I left school. But now I feel like that.
Really? Okay.
I look back fondly on those 2 years. And I thought I was my eyes just don't open up as big as they did before I came there. But, man, I think I'm just taking the long journey down the path of darkness.
Anyway, this morning I had a cup of coffee and a bowl of cornflakes. It was solidly unremarkable. But at least I didn't drown in existential dread.
We also, fucking slept on Sean's, entire brunch. I don't know why we don't just have a moment where we get to talk about everyone's little meal that they had, but that's fine.
That's all right.
I thought it was very fun, Sean, and my commentary was going to be that it seems like we're really going off the rails with these chicken waffle combos. It seems like they're just making it the full-blown regular sandwiches. Like, why don't we just go back to a bun at that point?
That's basically what it was. It was just like a sandwich with waffle buns.
All right, that was it. That was my color commentary. I'm done. Let's talk about Seth's very good album.
Tyler, I'm just trying to get off this topic because I'm so frustrated with you and your inability to drink hot coffee.
It's true. Why don't you like it?
Because I want to drink it right away. I don't want to wait.
Water it down.
No! That's bad. That's a bad idea.
Or just don't brew it that hot.
Yeah, that makes sense. Bean water, add a little bit more water. That probably makes it taste worse.
A little more water, a little less bean, if you will.
Yeah, it's like an Elvis Presley song.
I don't think I just don't like hot drinks at all. I just think I'm just not a hot drink person. I don't really like hot chocolate that much. I don't really like oatmeal. I don't really like...
Oatmeal is not a drink!
Oatmeal. Yes, can somebody get me some of that drinkable oatmeal? Are you like 100?
In my prune juice.
My prune juice. I put some Docalax inside of my fiber every day and mix it into my coffee. Shake it on up. It gets everything moving. The heart starts moving. The bowels start moving. My whole insides do a little jig.
All right, so we're here this week to talk about the new album from Wolfmen, Seth's group with friend of the show, Daniel Spencer, who's been on a few times. Their new album, The Man Who Disappeared, came out a couple of weeks ago. It's available on Bandcamp. And we just wanted to have Seth on to talk about the album, talk about where Wolfmen are now, and some of the process behind their second full length. So I guess first and foremost, Seth, I guess talk to us a little bit about the process behind this album. I know that you guys recorded a lot of this past winter, and you recorded it there for the most part in Athens, right?
Yeah, we recorded the entirety of the album in Athens at a really awesome studio called 3 Elliott Studios. Kind of really close to campus, and the reason for that being is a lot of students end up getting jobs there. But it's actually owned by a faculty member, Josh Antonuccio, and a good friend of ours named Adam Rich, works there basically full-time and is recording bands or helping Josh on big projects. And so whenever Josh is not in the studio doing a bunch of work, he's in there doing work himself. I would say they're the two main people in that studio. And so, yeah, the entirety of it was recorded there. A majority of it, actually all the drum tracks. So, by the way, my job is the drummer and percussionist in the group. So
Thanks.
all the not everybody knows that. But
no, I would totally appreciate that. Thanks.
So actually all the drum tracks we got done in like a day, maybe 2 at the most. Actually, I think we got it all done in the first day, which is a big relief. But we got most of everything done in February. Wolfmen actually used to be a trio. Was just Daniel, who you guys know, a bass player, a friend of ours named Jason, who is now in grad school at Cincinnati, but he's no longer with the band. We asked a student friend of ours at OU named Alex. He's like an upright bass player, actually, was his first instrument, and he plays electric as well. And then Bobby Lucas is a piano player that joined us last year. He was another grad student. So all of us are like students, music students at OU. And now actually Bobby graduated and lives in Pittsburgh, but I can get to that later. And so the majority of it was recorded in February while we were still all in school in the same place. And then we finished up gradually, like Adam gave us some mixes in the spring, and he was actually really, really busy doing some like adjunct teaching for OU and filling in for Josh, the owner. And we didn't really get any mixes until maybe late spring, early summer, and then we figured out what we needed to record the rest of, like a lot of overdubs for guitars and keyboards were, I guess, pretty much finished up. We may have added a few textures on top, and vocals definitely needed done. But the majority of the band was done by February, and we knew how everything was happening. The fun part is always when we got to the summer. That was the fun part. Was like, here's the whole track. How do we make it sound better? What textures can we add? And what's the order of the tracks and that kind of thing.
And so I know this is pretty typical of your guys' work. Is it seems like both with your previous band, Fathers of the Revolution, and with the previous Wolfmen album, you move pretty fast in the studio and you bring a lot of things pre-written into the studio. You're not a write in studio band. Why is that? Why do you prefer that method?
I would say it's a level of preparation. Daniel is always been the front man in I guess both bands, and him being kind of the driving creative force is someone that he doesn't like to go in a studio in a setting like that where a lot can happen. A lot can go wrong if you're not prepared. He likes to really be extra prepared. And the same thing goes for live performances. If a tune isn't ready that's brand new, we might not play it even though it's something we want to get out there immediately. But if it's not ready, it's not ready. So even though a lot of our material is improvised, the tunes themselves are pretty decided in terms of the content and the form. So Daniel would bring something to the group usually, or somebody else maybe would bring a riff, or we would talk about a form, and we figure out a tune and how to play it. Daniel being like I said, the creative force and almost like the deciding force, and saying these two people disagree about this, but I'm just going to say, hey, we're going to play it like this, and I'm just going to make that decision because it kind of speeds everything up and we get a lot more done. And he also writes all the lyrics, so in terms of the content, it's it makes sense that he does a lot of this stuff. Anyways, we would in the past we would just write a tune and it would be written together, but because we can never write anything separately because of this weird process. And then we would play it live eventually, and you usually would be, I guess, introduced to the set, the live set list pretty quickly, and then you just get used to playing it live. And then once it and Sean might know this from being a person that plays in bands, and maybe you guys as well from your days playing music or even listening to music, you understand that a piece of music has to kind of live with you for a little while to get really comfortable with it. So then it changes over time, and you realize oh, this sounds way better if I try it like this. You can't go into the studio in a studio setting not having done that. So for the first album, we took that approach and played tunes for about a year, maybe.
I think I should just step in and just say something real quick. I think it's so funny, the way that you're describing things, because it's in such an academic way that just no, it's okay. There's a point to this, that it's when you listen to the album, you're oh, these are people that actually know what they're doing. Whereas if you're listening to this some fucking pop punk band, their first album, you listen to probably Blink's album, they're I don't know, just play something, and then they just jam whatever, and then it's just so ramshackle thrown together. But I mean, you guys all went to school for music, and you all have played jazz performances and worked together. So this is such a higher level of performance, and on a different kind of you have a clear understanding, expectations. It's really almost like a job. I mean, it is a job because ideally you want to get paid for it. So you're treating it much more professionally and seriously than I'm sure lots of people who are making different genres, different styles of music are taking this. I think it's just kind of fun to hear you talk about it in such a it's a very clear understood way. And I think it's just fun to probably would see the polar opposites of some other bands. It's all so.
Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, that's a lot of people just jump into the studio and they have one person has a couple guitar chords written and then they're just going to figure the rest out. And that's great. A lot of awesome records have been made that way, but we just play a certain kind of music that you can't always do that. It just takes too long to get comfortable with the music. And I would say if we're influenced by jazz in any way, that's the way it feels. Is that, basically that like you can jump into the studio and play something, but it has to sit with you for a long enough time, and you have to know what the overall like message is, or like the overall scope of a tune maybe is. But that was the difference maybe between the first record and the second, was that first one was a lot more improvised, but we knew the tunes and were so comfortable improvising that it wasn't a problem. Second record was, of course, still just as much improvisation, but in a different method. At least 2 tracks we did not know what we were going to do when we walked in. Like there's a tune on there, Place Among Places is almost entirely improvised. Like we walked in and knew that we wanted like kind of a drone piece or some kind of interlude in a way. And Daniel and Bobby had been messing around with some chord progressions, and so we just did it. We were like, they came up with a feel, and that was like the most on spot, like in the studio on the spot kind of thing that we had done. And actually, if you want to know what the bass sound on that is, also really interesting, because we had Alex, who's an upright bass player, first and foremost by nature. We had him. I can't remember if we did it at the same time or if we did it later. I think he might have recorded his electric bass, and then we decided there wasn't enough space happening there. There wasn't enough texture. But we might have done it after as well. And I think that we recorded him on his upright bass. That's what like the bowing sound is, but it's also through a pedal. So we put an acoustic instrument kind of hooked up through a couple of really cool like guitar pedals. So that tune is entirely improvised. It's like less than 4 minutes, but it's an interlude in between a couple different tunes. And then The Man Who Disappeared was a tune that we knew all the sections individually, except for maybe the ending was a little more, we created it in the studio. But we also, with all those sections, we didn't know how to get from A to Z. Or like we had to figure out transitions and, will this sound good against that? So it was a little more experimentation with that one. But everything else, the other like 5 tracks were all had been sitting in our set list for at least like not a year, but maybe at least since like August, from like August to February.
Yeah, so I mean, you're in the phase where you finish your first album, so you're like, great, we've been working on these songs for years. And you're like, well, let's make the second album. And you're like, well, all we have is the time after we complete the first one. So I just think it's kind of fun. I think it's really just enjoyable just to hear you talk about it. I really don't have like a question. I think I just have quips about the things that you're saying. So,
songs like Remember Those Quiet Evenings and Oh Little House feel like, when you compare them to some of the music on the first Wolfmen record and some of the stuff I've heard you guys play live, they're surprisingly straightforward, like rock numbers, so to speak. But I'm sure there's some like complexity that lies beneath the surface in there. And I guess I was just curious, like, what was the decision-making process like to make songs like that sit on an album alongside like a 9-minute epic like Half Ghost?
Well, oh god, that's hard to answer. I mean, Half Ghost is maybe, oh god, thank you for putting it in those terms, first of all. I would say the decision behind putting those straightforward ones is, they were obviously in our set list and we really like playing them, so we have to record them. But a lot of this, I would say, came out of like what we were listening to at the time, or at least the fact that, oh man, I would say the biggest change for Wolfmen in the past year has been because of Bobby. And even Alex as well, like the switch in personnel, because Bobby is a keyboard player and a really good one at that. And like also someone that is like a trained jazz pianist. And he really liked this project coming in. And so the added texture of like this keyboard was like, it actually made improvising together somewhat more difficult because if there's one person who's soloing, there's three other people who have to accompany the soloist. We were just used to two, which is not necessarily much of a difference to a lot of like jazz people, but in a rock band setting where you play a lot of the same tunes over and over, it changed the sound instantly. And it was like once we added Bobby, we couldn't take him away. Like we tried playing tunes without keyboards, and it wasn't the same at all. So a lot of it was like we have to think about these tunes, like every aspect of it. Does that make sense? So like we trust each other as improvisers to do things right within the form, but in a way you kind of have to set like ground rules for everybody because there was so much else happening. There's think about it, there's just more notes, if that makes sense. And and actually a lot of the stuff we were doing was like it was kind of like math rock if you couldn't hear it or not. A lot of it was we didn't play in 4 a lot. It was like I'm looking at the set list now and I'm just trying to think if there's anything that's actually in 4 the whole time or 1 time signature the whole time, and I don't think there is. So a lot of it was, we wanted to play in weird time signatures and mess around a little bit harmonically, but you have to do that within a new like set of rules or like a different like established organization of those notes, because with the 4th person, specifically someone who has 10 possibilities at any time in 88 keys, it's way different. So it's not like adding a second guitar player. And we actually did have Bobby try to play some tunes on guitar because he can also play guitar, but it didn't really work. We just kind of heard keyboards all the time, and it didn't work having like, because Daniel changes the timbre of his guitar a lot, and that against bass and drums just kind of didn't sound right with the way that Bobby plays guitar, so it didn't work.
It's interesting that you made that last observation because I feel like I've played with people that have played multiple instruments, and I feel like you kind of hear their dominant, like the original instrument or the one that they really like to play, come out in the other instruments that they play. And sometimes it's a problem.
Yeah, I mean, Daniel's first instrument was bass, and so a lot of the guitar playing he does is not like a lead guitarist. It's more like it's actually someone who plays acoustic guitar, more or less, or rhythm guitar, because the first guitar he picked up was an acoustic and not electric. So he plays electric guitar kind of like how he plays acoustic guitar or bass. So it's a rhythm instrument rather than a solo lead voice.
Because I've always felt like when I play music, being a percussionist first, even when I play guitar, I still play it like a percussion instrument. Like it's hard for me to like really escape that, because I feel like that's just what I listen for still. Like I was trying to learn how to play a song the other day, and the YouTube guy who was kind of doing this little tutorial was saying something along the lines of, when you or people who play this song and know how to do it really well, they can generally like listen to it and know how to play it because they understand the fretboard really well. They don't really need something like this. And I was thinking that's funny because when I listen to like drum tracks, it's a lot easier for like I can almost like hear it way more easier than looking down and looking at actual like written music. It almost just seems like that's how you get the details right, is looking at like written music for drums for me, which is very important. But like when you're able to calibrate what you're doing by ear, it's a lot easier.
So Sean, you were talking about written music and detail. Having experienced Wolfmen both live and in studio, I don't actually know, do you guys write your music like on sheet music at all, or is it all like in your head? Do you write anything down?
Not a note, no. which is also incredibly challenging because some of the sections are some of the tunes are just very through composed, which means they don't come back to old sections, and they're like they go from one thing and they don't come back to it, and they go to a brand new thing and they go to a brand new thing. A lot of our tunes are in suites. In fact, Half Ghost and Oh Little House, we always play one after the other, because Oh Little House is more like the lyrical section of Half Ghost, because we just had this like almost 10-minute long instrumental epic that's like kind of based on some King Crimson stuff we were listening to. But after that, it's nice to have this little lyrical section. But no, we don't write a note down, and which makes it harder to play together sometimes. Because Remember Those Quiet Evenings is actually, I think about everything mathematically, but I try not to restrict the rhythms because of that. So I think about drums being a melodic instrument because of that. But in Remember Those Quiet Evenings, we play in both 3 and 4 at the same time. If you listen to drums and bass, they're playing in 3. If you listen to keys and guitar, they're playing in 4, technically. But it's kind of just like supposed to be like a punk rock sound, or like a krautrock sound that's like in your face and edgy the whole time, and it doesn't really matter what the meter is, and it's supposed to feel like it's, just always going to fall off the rails, and it's like, but it's moving on the rails. It's like a train that won't stop, and that's the idea. So, and we don't necessarily restrict ourselves when we get to the math, which is why sometimes we'll stay in one meter versus another, or certain sections don't sound really restricted and like I have to play this lick in 7 every single time, or I can just kind of go over the bar and think about a phrase, right? But no, the written music would actually definitely hurt us, I think, because we wouldn't be able to improvise as freely.
So then I guess one more technique follow-up to that. You talk a lot about improvising, and I know that that's something that everybody in this group values. So how did you decide what variations to use on the record? Like, was it a trial and error of, I've improvised this solo so many times live, and this is the one that I feel like captures it the best? Or like...
Well, the first thing is, and for some of the people in the group, including myself, is like, did we hit the right notes? Did I sound good individually? And then did what I play complement everybody else and make for a good tune? That's the first thing you ask, is like, did you get the right notes? But then you obviously go on from there, like I was saying. Did what I was playing compliment everyone? But you really have to think in terms of the whole scope of the tune, because so many of them have sections that need to build in a very correct way. If I go to the hi-hat too early, or if I go to the ride cymbal too early, in a certain section, and I have way too long to build up a certain amount of intensity, I've screwed myself, and I need to, it needs to be redone or something. Surprisingly enough, if we're just talking about the improvised solos, though, Bobby on the tune Half Ghost, which is like kind of the only tune with proper solo sections, just because it's instrumental, so it's like it's the only thing happening. But there are several guitar solos in the record. On Bobby's solo in Half Ghost, he did one take on a Fender Rhodes, and it was beautiful. And then we just kept it, and we were like, "All right, Bobby, you're done." But Daniel, actually, guitar solos were one of the last things we did. Recording-wise, it was like the end of the sessions in February, because Daniel would do either rhythm tracks or whatever he plays underneath, maybe a solo, or he just didn't play it all because he's supposed to be soloing. So the solos were definitely usually overdubbed. But in terms of the overall improvisation, it was really hard sometimes to... You have to compromise, because because there are a lot of times on the record, because a lot of stuff is improvised and we play everything live and we just want the band being live in the recording versus overdubbing piece by piece, there's a lot of times you have to sacrifice and say, oh, well, I didn't really nail that section, or that transition was a little rough for me, but everyone else sounded good, which means we have to keep it, and that's the track. So sometimes you have to make sacrifices like that.
But I mean, even if that's the case, even if you technically didn't do something perfectly, I mean, you're never going to play anything perfectly live anyway, right? Right, okay. So I mean, like, I feel like we're in a stage kind of like in our technological history where, you know, I don't think we have a problem with making things sound clean and like making things make sure that they all sound perfect and right, but I think there becomes a point when it starts to become detrimental, in which we're kind of like almost looking for those imperfections. We're looking for like you can hear like the slides and someone like going up and down their guitar and like the little sounds, just everything that's kind of happening within the recording itself. Now, in some ways, that's the things that people like because it makes it feel real, makes it feel organic. It's why people like records, like vinyls, because they kind of bring a little bit more of that warmth, that kind of extra kind of noise to it that I feel like we're kind of like, well, do we really need everything to be perfectly squeaky clean?
We didn't want it to be shiny, squeaky clean. It was like we want the imperfections, and that's why we trust each other as improvisers, or the sections just call for it. Like, we don't know what everyone's going to do in this section, but I'll see you on the other side at the end of the take.
I mean, it's not like you're ever gonna like keep a take where you just like, whoops, I just didn't play there.
Well, because
It's always just like, whoops, you know, maybe that note was played a little too quick or it's a little too slow, but it's like most people aren't gonna pick that up, right? Because if they're not like super musically trained, they're not even gonna notice it.
Correct. Yeah. There were a lot of things that, you just, and Sean can probably attest to this, is like you're gonna mess a whole lot up in the studio because you're just completely isolated. You are as exposed as any musician can be in that setting, because every part of you is amplified. So it's not live in the use of the word live, because people think live is like you put it in like a live like bar setting, like a venue, but it's not that way at all. So it's way more exposed. So it was difficult to like have to sacrifice certain takes versus others, or usual kind of record things.
The absence of permanence is a grateful relief when you're live or rehearsing versus in the studio where it's like, oh damn it, and that's the one part I wanted to nail.
Right.
So kind of to step away from like the technical aspects of recording and talk more about like the themes of the album.
Yeah, please.
Was there like any, like, was there a theme in the album that you would say? Because I mean, some of the titles of the songs, they don't seem completely disjointed from one another, but it doesn't seem like you guys were out to make this like epic 9-track album where everything was one continuous like movement.
If you listen to the lyrics themselves, it is more they are sadder songs than the first album. God, you asked about the themes, and it's hard to answer that because a lot of it is you're right in what you're asking. You basically gave yourself the answer in a way, because a lot of it is, well, it's just that you can listen to it all the way through and hear a theme for yourself and kind of associate anything you want with it. I was while I was at the convention PASIC this weekend, there was a point at which I forget what performance this was, but it was a world music ensemble. It was like three guys accompanying this woman playing like an African xylophone kind of instrument. It's just a solo instrument, and they were accompanying her. But what she told us before and after she had been playing was that you can interpret this any way you want. If you hear a melody or something that connects to you, you're not wrong at all. So in a way, you can think about this album being, it's supposed to connect to you in any way, and that really goes for all of music, I think. And that's something I like to abide to, but maybe Daniel doesn't always believe that, or anyone else in the group, Bobby or Alex. But is that music can be entirely interpretive. If you hear something on there and you're connecting with it, or you think that this is a story all the way through, you're absolutely not wrong. But I would say we did not set out to make a long epic. It was definitely, you're right, that it was, you can hear themes going back and forth. And actually, the track at the end that is just acoustic, is just Daniel on acoustic guitar live with voice. He addresses all the themes simultaneously, just one after the other, and kind of brings it all together as one story, but they may also be separate in a way. And he actually, there's a couple references that on that track and on the rest of the record that he makes to the first record we did. Whenever he says fire, that's referencing the last track from our first album called Now Come Fire. But I would say there's not necessarily one story happening the whole time. You can definitely make connections, but in my mind, and because I'm not the one singing the lyrics, to me, it's not necessarily anything on a personal level. But I don't think, I know Daniel, since he's one of my best friends, he's not the kind of person that writes lyrics that are very personal and touches on anything necessarily in his life, but he is also a really good novelist or a writer. I always hear a story if I listen to it all the way through, but we didn't necessarily set out with that intention, if that answers your question.
You brought up the point that this album is a lot sadder than the first album. And I think that, listening to the two back-to-back, almost anybody can come to that conclusion. But
Daniel likes sad boy songs, as we like to call them. Like What If I Could is a super, super sad boy song. If anything is in 6/8, just like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. It's a sad boy song, and there's a couple of those on the first album too.
He does love his sad boy music. But it's so interesting, I think, like, seeing the two as kind of an evolution of this group. They almost feel like time capsules of particular points of this band, especially with the personnel changes. To have this, like, the first album is like this almost like dancey, upbeat sound. Like, it's so upbeat at points that, like, it could really be kind of like a dancey rock record in a way. And then the second album is much more like ponderous and like insular and really like music you sit and think to. They're sad boy songs. I like your description. I guess, what was it this time around that, was it kind of a collective feeling that you were going to go in that direction? Or was it more like those were the songs you had, this was the direction you were going?
Maybe a little bit of both, but definitely more of what you just said, is that these are the songs we were making. These are like the influences we were taking out of it. Was like, let's write a King Crimson kind of tune, and then immediately after that go into maybe a personal story about like a memory in a house, and like your where you used to live. But like, and it was just kind of, a lot of it was on the spot, and that's again back to the way we improvise. And some tunes will not have lyrics until they have been fully formed, and like everything, like we know what parts we're playing and all that kind of stuff. And Daniel will just like, I'm not going to write lyrics yet. Or, what do you guys think the name of the song should be? I don't know yet. Like, we're not sure yet. But it's also just the influences that we have. And maybe, like, for me personally, it was really fun to make this record and hear what it sounded afterwards, because I went from undergrad to grad school and, kind of got farther down the rabbit hole, as you might think. As maybe Sean, that's just like, I'm having a lot of fun in these 2 years, but it's incredibly hard to get through this, and sometimes I'm really nostalgic and I don't feel like a real person. So maybe I'm the man who disappeared, because being in academia can be that way sometimes. So maybe the fact that we were all School of Music trying to be academics while trying to simultaneously be a rock band in a way was a little splitting of personalities. So for me personally, it really fit where I was in my life. But also it was just like, this is how the tune ended up, and this is what we wrote together. So it was really fun.
Yeah, I kind of pondered that myself when you were kind of introducing the album a little bit, that like you guys have changed lineups among the two, like fathers and Wolfmen, not, and it seems to be, it wasn't of because people got like burnt out of the band and they were just like, you know what, I'm done with this. It was really just like it was time for us to go. And there is something that's like very like spiritual phantom-y, like spirit and phantom-y about that like, it just moves on. Almost when it seems to get ripe, and I wondered if that was kind of like subconsciously there was a little bit of that was going on with these lyrics and these titles. I don't want to, I don't the whole death of the author thing, but like, when I was looking at this, I was kind of like, oh man, it kind of gives me a little bit of this of like, but I don't think that's bad because I feel like having listened to both bands now, when you bring in the new blood too, it really helps you in continuing to go in that new direction, that further direction that allows you to grow. And like, that's really cool.
Yeah, I mean, Daniel and I have been playing music for 6 years now, but we've changed who else we've been playing with in that time. So a lot of it was like, and I would say there were never any harsh feelings about who left, or who wasn't on the next project or making the new tunes or whatever. For, a lot of obvious reasons. A lot of it was like this person left Athens and left. A lot of it was like we're a college band, technically still. 3 of us are still in school for the time being. And I think I'm excited to see what the next chapter will be in a way, because I'm like, we made these records while we were in school and while we were kind of, not necessarily, like they came out just as we wanted them to. Yeah, a lot of it was maybe the place we are in our lives, still being students and still not quite feeling like real people, like students do. Or maybe something like that. But a lot of it was, taking influences of other bands and other genres and just saying, this is the thing we want to do right now, and this is the thing, we might be studying.
I want to compliment you too on being a fantastic percussionist. It's always wonderful to hear you play. I really enjoy that drummer to drummer. And don't be like flattered, like, oh, really me? Like, oh yeah, because nobody can see this because we don't do it live anymore. But like, you're super good, and it's really fun to listen to you.
Thanks, man. I've taken a lot of weird steps in my playing. Being in the same city for 6 years does something to my playing, because I went from just trying to be like, I came into school wanting to like, oh, I want to nail like an orchestra job or play a classical percussionist or something, and then I ended up wanting to just play drum set and jazz all the time, and not necessarily give up the other things, but specialize and keep it as my foreground.
That's right. As someone that designed your business card, you definitely were having problems at one point deciding what you wanted to be. And so it was like, well, do you want to be a jazz musician? Do you want to be a generalist? And that was sort of at your crossroads, which I think was really fun.
Yeah, you were. You kept asking me, and I was like, I don't really know. What do you think, Tyler? And you were like,
I'll be like,
I don't know.
You're like a jazz musician, like an orchestral performer, like 2 different kinds of sexy, and you have to really like decide on.
Is that not sexy?
I mean, trust me, they both are. I'm just saying, So, with that being said, so what have you kind of landed on then? What's your path right now? If you at the beginning felt like you were going to be orchestral, are you?
Oh no, I have turned the tables, and I've gone the route of jazz and contemporary music, but not contemporary classical, I guess. I don't want to land an orchestra job because those jobs are impossible, but that's even besides the point, because I just don't want to be in one of those jobs.
Right. I have a cousin that is going for his doctorate in performance, I think with the bassoon. So that's about as niche as you possibly could be. But boy, actually, I think he just graduated recently, so he's been fishing around for orchestra jobs. And boy,
And that world is hard, man. That is, a lot of people will stay in school as long as they can, and not in a bad way because you can get degrees and become a professor at the same time. But those jobs are just so hard to come by. But personally, I just want to be like a freelance musician and keep playing in all the projects that I want to play in. And if I can play full time for a living, that is 100% the job.
right? You want to make some of that hot music, that
Yeah, dude,
that
all
salt
the
of the earth music
that all the kids are into nowadays.
That's all right. We're going to see you in 2 years accompanying backup drums for Garth Brooks, rolling in all that country money, and you're going to be like, yeah, I play jazz on the side, but man, I love this paycheck. And just eating caviar and pumpkin pie. It's all I'm just going to live on.
You know, it's funny you should say that because I actually have recently joined like a country rock group.
Hell yeah.
Kind of, I mean, it makes good money, but it's also a lot of fun, and it's people that are passionate about playing. And at first it was like a freelance thing, and now I'm just like, well, these guys are serious and they want to do it, so I'll ride this train until it crashes. But I don't think it's going to because they're pretty good. But you know, that's besides the point.
You just wrote a lyric right there.
Yeah.
See, you're becoming the next country star.
See, that's what I mean. Like that, when I was taking drum set lessons, that was what my drum set teacher taught me. He was like, "Listen," he's like, "play rock because you love it." He's like, "But if you ever want to get a job at drum set," he's like, "go find a country band because they play like straight beats all the time, and like they get paid great money to just sit back there and just have a good time doing easy work."
You know what's also a really weird phenomenon is rap, like country rap, like country hip hop right now. I cannot make this up. It's a thing. I haven't.
Oh yeah.
I didn't know it was thing. No, I don't want it. I'm sorry. That is my breaking point. That is where I stop. It weirds me out, and I don't know how to feel about it. I'm pretty sure I'm gonna like share bills with these people, and I don't know what's gonna happen. I'm kind of scared. It's gonna freak me out, but
I can see it now.
No.
Seth Alexander, the pioneer of new country. NU.
Please no.
I've become so numb, I can feel you there.
So what did you guys, I mean, I know that we got off a little bit, but also what were your you kind of gave some of your thoughts, but what were did you have any specific questions or even overall questions for the album otherwise?
Was Daniel inspired by Radiohead in the first vocals in the first song? That's what my notes are for the first song.
That's a question for Daniel because I don't know. You might be right.
Let's see inside his head. How unfortunate. Okay.
Yeah, sometimes he just brings lyrics in and doesn't tell us how or what the details are, which makes it a little more mysterious because we have to interpret it, but the tune is usually set by then. So, but that tune, What If I Could, is actually, it's either a sad boy song or it's a Philip Glass epic. So,
you know, those are two compatible things.
Hey, it was, it kind of works. It's just messing around. Remember Those Quiet Evenings, or no, sorry, The Man Who Disappeared, that track is, I think Daniel came in, not from a lyrical standpoint, maybe actually, but wanting to write a song pretty much like a Grizzly Bear tune, if you guys know that band, specifically like Sleeping Oot. He came in like kind of wanting to write a tune like that, maybe just in like some stranger meters, but like I think the guitars and the feel of it he like really, really wanted. That's definitely an influence I know of from the tune, from the album. Half Ghost is kind of a King Crimson copycat, but also a Steve Reich thing. Because do you guys know what phasing is?
Yes, I do. Maybe you can explain it to the audience though, because
are those your hater shades, John?
Mm-mm.
Okay, those are your glasses. What are those?
I don't know, these are just my safety goggles.
Are you about to get hit with some fresh knowledge, or are you just putting on your safety goggles?
I put them on whenever I'm going to get about hit some fresh knowledge, because, like, that shit cuts deep. So it's just like, you're good. Just go ahead.
Tell us who Steve Reich is. Cut us with that fresh knowledge.
Oh, God. Okay, well, Steve Reich is from the collection of composers maybe known as minimalists. Some people announce his name Steve Reich, but it looks the same. I'm pretty sure it's Reich, but I don't know. I hear it differently from everyone. Anyways, in the tune Half Ghost, we do this thing called phasing. And phasing is basically when two people are playing the same thing at the same time, and one person slowly speeds up while the other person stays behind, and then that person then moves to the next beat. And then you just do it every time. So you can hear Daniel phasing against Bobby on keyboards, and he phases to the next beat, and then he phases to the next, and then the next, until he gets all the way back around. And once he's back around, I play a fill, and then they move up, they like do a modulation, and then they do it again. But it feels like a whole new tune as soon as we've like modulated in that way. It's more of a level of intensity, because what minimalism is, well, it's exactly what you think it is, the same thing for a very long time, and you can hear that when you listen to that section. And basically the idea is that you hear this melody so many times that it's like set in your brain and established, and it sits there for a really long time. And imagine it like, not like elevator music, but something that eventually fades to the background, and you're just trying to hear all the intricacies of it. And that's what minimalism is a way, is that you hear the same thing for a really long time. And then all of a sudden, after however long it takes for your brain to kind of normalize it and get used to it, it changes. And that's the idea. Steve Reich writes for a lot of percussionists. So he's a big influence on me. He writes for mallet instruments, for drums. He has just a piece called Drumming, in which people phase, and that's kind of where we got the idea. And Steve Reich took this influence and this idea of minimalism, and a lot of the melodies and interlocking rhythms that he has. He took all these influences from Africa, because they do these kinds of things where the beats don't feel wrong if they phase, or if they're playing this weird intricate rhythm together, and you get melodies out of it. So if two people are playing a different pattern over top of each other, you can hear new melodies. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think that sheds a lot of light too on that particular track, because I think a lot of people, when they see 9-minute instrumental, they kind of get scared of it, but
yeah, they're usually like warded off by it. But the middle section is the phasing section. And what you want to listen for there is what Bobby and Daniel are doing. They're phasing against each other. And underneath them, Alex and I are what we refer to as the rock. We just sit there and we don't move. Bobby and Daniel are the ones who have to listen to each other or not listen to each other so they don't mess up in a way, because a lot of people do that when you're phasing. It's actually incredibly hard to play something as someone at the same time and not move with them or move against them in a way. So, but you want to listen to their interaction and how maybe slow or how fast it goes sometimes, and then the melodies that are created between them. It's not the same thing happening over and over, but technically it is, if that makes sense. So it's the same thing happening over that changes slightly piece by piece, which kind of becomes a puzzle. And then in the next section, when I do a fill and they modulate, which means they just go to a different key. They basically go up one step on a guitar or keyboard. We bring in all these crazy percussion instruments. We have hand claps in the back, which is another shout out to Steve Reich. And we just added all these textures because we want this just big minimalist epic of textures happening, because we're so used to playing this kind of music, and we know what it needs, or what at least what we want to give it, and what we think it should have.
So I guess let's go around the table and we'll save Seth for last, since it's your album. But let's talk a little bit about maybe like our key takeaway, a key track, or a key like thing to listen for in the album for the audience who presumably haven't listened to this as they're listening to the podcast. But I hope they're all going to go listen to it immediately when they're done listening to us. For me, I think the fun part about Wolfmen has always been the juxtaposition between your guys' interest in rock and pop music and the more experimental music, the contemporary jazz, the stuff that you're studying in school. And on this album in particular, I think there are a lot of really cool marriages of avant-garde sounds with traditionally acceptable pop music. And so I would definitely tell people to look out for that, especially on songs like What If I Could and Man Who Disappeared. Songs that, when you first look at them, may seem very long and very experimental and very compositional, but I think people will be surprised by how familiar parts of it actually are to them.
Thank you, Tim. I take that as that whole little snippet as a compliment, because that's exactly what we were going for. But let's go around. I want to hear what you guys have to say.
As far as the album, I really like it, and I think the reason I like it is because at one point in my life, I was exactly where you guys were at, where I was having, at no point since I was in graduate school was I mentally stimulated, and that like really showed itself in my personal writings that I did for that time, but also kind of I continue to kind of stimulate myself in terms of finding new materials and being creative in terms of like thinking about politics and things like that, because that's what I did. But I really feel like when I listen to this album, I get this sense, and I don't know if that will date itself to a particular point when you listen to this album maybe in a couple of years and you'll say like, that was funny because that was my graduate school self. But like it's really cool because I kind of feel nostalgic for this in a little bit, because you can, like, that's kind of great. That's kind of great about it, is like you're here and this is definitely like a growth album for you. So it is not a point of like, it's just a station in the journey. And I like that this is something new. I thought it was mastered really well. I thought the parts were done really well. It's different not hearing Daniel sing as much. I'm just so used to his voice. I was kind of caught off guard by the fact that for the 7 tracks that there was not as much of Daniel singing. But that's all right, because I feel like that's what you're going for. Like, that's what I've learned from having this kind of interview, is that I feel like you guys definitely wanted to go down this road where you're experimenting musically, right? And like sometimes vocals take away from that. I feel like sometimes I know a lot of people that don't like experimental rock because the idea of not having vocals just kind of kills their music, because it's non-vocal music. I feel like is a little bit harder to digest in some respects, but I appreciate that.
I think my favorite parts it's definitely a sandwich for me. I think I appreciate and enjoy the beginning and the end. I think the meat of this album is The Man Who Disappeared, which good. I'm glad that the title track is my favorite, and then Half Ghost. And I think what's really resonating most with me of those two songs is they have almost a sort of like, they sort of almost pull, me, of course, my perspective is they almost have like some subtle like classic rock influences. Like Half Ghost has like almost like this Doors like kind of like keyboard solo towards the end, and then there's just like some good like just, I don't know. Those two songs kind of really resonate with me, and I think I'll go back to those. I think the most, and I think your mention of like, oh, well, sometimes Dino is a sad boy and he writes sad boy songs, and I'm like,
I'm not saying Daniel is a sad boy. He might be, but that's not the reason for the sad boy songs. I think he just really enjoys sad boy songs. And I'm
sure the boys of Brand New, I'm sure, aren't all sad boys. And so, to bring it back home to a previous episode, how do I learn to appreciate the sad songs?
You just think about it being happy, or listen to it in a major key. That
sounds really dumb. That's there you said a lot of smart things.
That's how good songs are written.
You've said all night. Just pretend it's happy. Just change it in your mind.
Sean, what were you doing?
He was making a sandwich.
Oh, I was making a sandwich.
Oh, okay.
Out of desk supplies.
Although I was hoping that he was gonna like actually make a sandwich, but then he kind of said, "I'm gonna make a sandwich here," and then he kind of just diverted away from making the sandwich. So he was like, "Well, the music is the bun, and then we got some meat, which is the music." And then you put on the vocals, and that's like a nice layer of like cognac cheese, right? And then he just totally got rid of it. Like he just scrapped the whole analogy.
Yeah, it was
there.
a sweet analogy, and then you just didn't even finish it.
Right. It just turned into like a cheese filled like roll up thing. It wasn't even like a sandwich. It was just like bleh.
You just smothered butter all over the bread. Didn't even finish it. You just got lazy.
I think I've gotten razzed for like for saying stupider shit than this. This is truly a low hanging fruit razzing of me. I understand. I don't know where places are. Okay, I don't know where Taylor lives. I'm sorry. It's below me somewhere.
I love you so much. Never ever change. You're.
Okay, so Seth, if you were to give a pitch for this album to a listener of our podcast who maybe hasn't listened to Wolfmen before, what would you tell them about it? It's kind of our closing thought here.
A pitch would be to listen to the album in its entirety. Not as necessarily like a warning or anything, just the reason I say that is because you need to have an open mind when you listen to, because you may not like one track, but you really might, you might really like, some people might call it folk, but you can just think about it being acoustic guitars and voice. And that's the last track on the album. But the like somewhere near the beginning is like more in your face and rock. So, and you can definitely hear themes all the way through, and that's kind of the point. And that's why I say that, is that don't just listen to maybe one track, but also listen for all the weird intricacies, because a lot of this we thought out pretty much all the way through, and some of it we would improvise or just spitball and just put stuff on there. But there's a lot of layers in these songs, a lot more than I think the first album, because we had obviously a lot more instruments to start with, but we also just had a lot more ideas, and a lot more was thought out and composed and through composed as well. So just, have an open mind, and please enjoy it. Let me know if you hate it or if you like it. And thank you that those of you who listened to it. It was a really proud moment of ours, and to finish it up, it was a lot of fun.
All right, now it's time to round the show out like we always do with a round of shameless plugs from everybody on the panel. We'll start with Tyler Reed. Tyler, where can the people find you and your work?
Hey everybody, you can find my design and illustration work at tylerdreed.com, and you can find me on socials as TDRSign on Instagram and Twitter.
Sean Evans, where can the people find you?
You can find me on Twitter at sevans8910. That's 78910.
Seth Alexander, thank you again for joining us. Where can the people find Wolfmen, the new album, your other work, all the things?
Well, thanks guys for having me on the show. I haven't been on here in a while, and it's good to talk to everyone. You can find Wolfmen material on our Facebook page through links in there, or on Bandcamp. Just search Wolfmen and Bandcamp. We're hoping to have the materials up on Spotify, iTunes, and some streaming websites pretty soon. We just have to work out all the rights and those kind of normal music policies and that kind of thing. And you can find me at smapercussion.com, and also like on Twitter and Instagram at Drumming Seth, or on Facebook or email or whatever. Thanks again, guys.
Absolutely. And you can follow me on the socials. I'm at TC Olmstead. You can like and follow the show. We're at Dudes Brunch. Coming up on the holidays, which means it's probably time for some holiday-themed merch, so keep your eyes out for that. And, of course, if you really like us, you can leave us a review on iTunes. Helps new people find the show. Other than that, we will see you all next week for another episode of Dudes Brunch.
This is the marrow of life, Taylor. You have to sometimes you just gotta suck it all out.